Hi, I'm Laura Nelkin. I'm a knitwear designer. I live in upstate New York in the Finger Lakes region. And for the past year or so, I have been obsessed with the new to me knitting tool, Stitch Saver. And if you've been following me for a while, you know that I'm also a little bit obsessed with side to side sweaters. Last fall, as I was playing with techniques with Stitch Saver, I realized that I could make knitting my Novus sweaters so much easier if I incorporated using Stitch Saver into the techniques used in the sweaters. I have about, I would say, 20 sweaters in my Novus sweater collection. There are baby sweaters, there's pullovers, there's cardigans. I'm wearing novel long. Behind me on the wall is Tosca vest, which is sized from kids all the way through adults, and then Baby Novus. I'll be showing you techniques in this video on a little tiny eeny weeny Novus that I use when I teach my Novus construction classes. So I think the first thing to do is tell you a little bit about the Novus construction, then tell you about Stitch Saver, and then we'll jump into techniques together. The Novus construction is worked side to side, and it's a seamless construction that is also structured. And what happens when you knit a Novus sweater is you cast on at your right cuff and work a sleeve, and then you provisionally cast on stitches for the front and back of your sweater. And then you work these very long rows as you work over your shoulder, and then you split for your neckline. And if you are working a cardigan or a jacket, you end up splitting for the neckline, working the front and back separately, and then putting the front and back stitches on a holder. And if you're working a pullover, you work the front and back separately, and then you rejoin up for the second shoulder, work across the shoulder, and then hold your front and back stitches on a needle and knit the sleeve across. I have, as I said, I have 20-ish patterns that use this construction. You will need one of my patterns to follow along with this video. I have a feeling that many of you already have one of these patterns in your collection. So if you go ahead and look at it, you'll understand where the maneuvers I'm teaching you are used in the pattern. The next thing to tell you about is Stitch Saver. And Stitch Saver is hollow silicone tubing. That's all that it is. I have a detailed blog post about it that I will link below, and I'll also give you a link if you want to buy a whole spool of it. You can also buy it in shorter lengths, like at your local yarn store or at a big box craft store. It'll be in the beading section. I like to use the 2mm Stitch Saver. You can also use 3mm or 4mm if your gauge is larger. But I find for if you're working underneath like US size 6 needles that the 2mm Stitch Saver works perfectly. So that's actually all that I have in my stash. You can use Stitch Saver for holding stitches. You can use it for provisional cast-ons, and you can also use it held up the edge of your knitting if you want to have stitches that you're going to be picking up later. And that's the first technique that I'll be showing you with the Stitch Saver. So grab a pattern so you can follow along as I am working on this. Baby Novus, which is behind me, and also I have one right here to show you a little bit closer that I just knit for my friend's baby my friend's son's baby that he and his wife are having in February. Baby Novus actually just is getting an update so that it's written to use the Stitch Saver. So if you watch this video and you want to follow a pattern exactly that uses the Stitch Saver technique, if you already own the Baby Novus sweater, you'll be getting an update. And if you don't own it, maybe you want to purchase it, and then you will learn all the techniques that you need to know for a Novus sweater in that little tiny cute baby sweaters. And I find that we all always have babies that we are knitting for, whether we're knitting for ourselves or knitting other things as well. Babies always need little tiny cute baby sweaters. So without further ado, I'm going to be showing you techniques based on this little pattern right here. Let's jump in with a sleeve. Okay, let's start with the sleeve of your Novus sweater, which is how all the patterns start. The first thing that you're going to do is grab a length of stitch saver that is 2 times the length of the sleeve and the front of the sweater. So I'll give you an example. If your sleeve is 15 inches long and the front of your sweater is 15 inches long, then you would want, that would be 30 inches, and we'll multiply that by 2. That would be 60 inches. Make it a little longer than that, so maybe like 66 inches long. Grab a length that is that long, and that is what you're going to start with your stitch saver as you hold it up the side of the sweater. And I think what's important as we jump into this is to understand the why of why you're doing this. This is the little sleeve right here on the Eeny Weeny Novus, and you're working your sleeve flat. And then you're picking up stitches along the side of the sleeve when you go to work this little side panel right here at the end of working the sweater. So when we are carrying the stitch saver up the side of the sleeve on the front and back of the sleeve, what that's doing is making it so that you don't have to pick up stitches later when it's time to work the side panel of the sweater. So that's kind of the why of what we're doing right here. So what I'm going to do is I've got my stitches already cast on for a little tiny sleeve, and I'm going to hold my stitch saver kind of underneath the working yarn right there. And then I'm going to, I'm going to say that again. I'm going to hold my stitch saver over my working yarn, and then I'm going to bring my working yarn over and around to the back of my work. And you can see that I've caught the stitch saver right there. The astute of you will notice that I did that right about at the half point of my stitch saver. So I'm doing that at the middle of my stitch saver so that half of the stitch saver I can be carrying up one side of the sleeve, and the other half of the stitch saver I'm going to be carrying up the other side of the sleeve. So once I've wrapped it, I'm going to go ahead and knit across my sleeve stitches. And I'm just going to work this once or twice with you so that you get into the hang of it, and then I'll show you what it looks like after you have knit a whole sleeve. So I'm just knitting across right here. And now I've gotten to the end of my row, so I'm going to turn my work, and again, I'm going to hold the stitch saver in front of the yarn and then wrap the yarn around. And I'm on the cuff right now, so I am bringing my yarn to the back of my work so that I am ready to knit across the next row. And now I am going to knit across. And you'll continue on like that, carrying the stitch saver up the side of your work. And I think what I really want to do on the next row is show you how to work this if you're purling on the next row, because you will be doing that once you get into the body of the sleeve. So I'm going to turn my work, and then I'm going to bring the stitch saver in front of the working yarn again, and then I'll just bring my working yarn to the front right there so that I am ready to purl. And now I am going to be purling across. And you can see that that stitch saver is getting caught by the working yarn and is coming up the side of the sleeve. What it's actually doing when you're wrapping around the stitch saver is it's the leg that you would end up picking up if you were picking up stitches, but it's just right there, and it's going to be ready for you when it's time to do that pickup so that you don't have to do the pickup, which is pretty slick in my opinion. Because I find if I polled knitters and asked you what you don't like to do the most, the thing that you all mostly don't like to do is pick up stitches. I feel like I can go out on a limb and just say that. So let's look at what that looks like on a sleeve once you have worked all the way up the length of your sleeve. So Once you're done knitting your sleeve, it'll look just like this. And if I flip it over, you can see where that stitch saver has the working yarn wrapped around it at the edge. And those are your picked up stitches that you'll be sliding onto your needle later. Next up, once you're done with your sleeve, we'll be casting on stitches for the front and back of your sweater. So let's go ahead and do that next. So one of the things that's interesting about side-to-side sweaters is that row gauge dictates the width of your sweater and stitch gauge dictates the length of your sweater. So once you're done knitting your sleeve, it is time to cast on stitches for the length of your sweater for the front and the back of it. So you'll see right here that I have the wrong side of my sleeve facing me. And the way that this pattern used to be worked, or you still might work it if you're following along, is you would be provisionally casting on stitches with scrap yarn onto a spare needle and then working across them with your working yarn. But you'll see right here that I have my stitch saver already attached from holding it up the sleeve, and I can just go ahead and provisionally cast on stitches onto the stitch saver. So if your pattern says to, with scrap yarn, provisionally cast on 25 stitches and then work across them with the working yarn, instead what you can do is provisionally cast on right onto the stitch saver. So this pattern right here, I'm just going to put like 6 stitches on right now. I do have a separate video that goes over doing a provisional cast on with stitch saver in detail, but I want to go over it again quickly. So what I'll do is I have my needle right here. I've got my wrong side facing. I'm going to take my working yarn. I'm going to go over my needle, and then I'm going to dive underneath my stitch saver and grab my yarn. And now you'll see that I have 2 stitches on my needle and I have 2 stitches on my stitch saver. And I'm going to continue like this, casting on stitches until I have the correct number of stitches that the pattern calls for. I'm just doing a few on there so you get an idea of how to work it, and we'll be working that one more time when we cast on for the back as well. So after I got those provisional stitches on, I turned my work so my right side is facing, and what I'm going to do is knit across those provisional stitches. And there's one thing I'm going to do when I get to that first provisional stitch that is in between the sleeve and the front. And it's that stitch right there, and you'll see it looks kind of like a little bit baggy and big. And if I went and I worked into it, you're going to end up with something that's not so tidy. So what I love to do with that stitch is just work it through the back loop, twisting it, because that kind of tightens up that join right there. If you don't do that, you can fix it when you go to do the side panel, but I find that it really helps to just take the moment to knit that stitch for the back loop. And now I'm going to continue on, and I am going to knit across all of my sleeve stitches. This is so magical. I was so excited when I realized we could do this and kind of adjust the way the patterns are written. Okay, I've knit across all my sleeve stitches, and now I'm ready to cast on my back stitches for the sweater. And what I'm going to do is do that exactly the same. I'll just put that needle aside. As I did for the front stitches, I'll yarn over the needle, I'll dip down in front of the stitch saver and grab my yarn over, dip down, yarn over, dip down. You'll probably be casting on the same number of stitches. I didn't count on the other side because this is just a little mini swatch. And now I am going to turn my work, and I am on a wrong side row, and I'm going to be setting up for the edging. So I'm going to, on this pattern, and it's different for every pattern, I'm going to be knitting the first 3 stitches, and then I am going to be purling. But when I get to that stitch that is in between the sleeve, the first provisional cast on stitch, I really suggest purling that or knitting that through the back loop to make things nice and tidy. And now you're going to go on and purl to the end, following your pattern that you're working as written. So now I want to show you what this looks like. I have a little version of this all the way done so you can see what the first half of the sweater looks like flat. That is right here. All right, so here's this craziness underneath. Let me just kind of get all of that out of the way so you can see it really well. Here is your sleeve with that stitch saver coming up the side of the sleeve. Here is the provisional cast on for the front and the provisional cast on for the back. These are the shoulder stitches right here. So this is the front of your sweater and this is the back of your sweater. And what I've done here is I've gone on and worked it so that I've finished the first half of the sweater, and I also have the left half worked as well, so we can look at how the little back panel works on the Novus sweater together. And that's the first point where we'll be using the stitch saver to kind of get all of our stitches back together. So those of you who've been knitting my Novus sweaters for a while know that we like to call this the uterine stage. I don't think that anybody's lady parts look like this, but it cracks me up that somebody came up with that, like, I think 10 years ago. And whenever I get to this point in a Novus sweater, I think to myself, one uterine stage done, time to do the second one. So one thing to point out at this point is if you are working a pull over version of the Novus sweaters, when you get to this point, you're just splitting for the neckline and working the front and back separately, and then joining back up for the left shoulder. And I'll show you a diagram of that at the very end of this video. So let's do the back panel next. All right. Let's do this back panel together. This might be new for some of you, and others of you might have wanted to see me do it in detail, so we'll just go over it together. I have the left half right now underneath the camera. These are my front stitches. These are my provisional stitches and my little sleeve right here. And what I'm going to do is turn this because I'm going to be working this back panel right here on the little eeny weeny Novus. And now what I'm going to do is grab that right half that I showed you in the last section. And I've got a circular needle right here. Just try to get this all set up and not too crazy. And I've got my back stitches held on my right half. And what I'm going to do is take the stitch saver from those held stitches on the back and put it onto the circular needle. And then I'm going to go ahead and pull that stitch saver through those stitches. You might find, and I find this, that it's a little easier to push the needle than it is to pull the stitch saver, because when you pull the stitch saver, you could pull it off of the needle, and that might make you a little nervous for a second when you have live stitches kind of hanging out in the world, not held onto by anything. So if you push instead of pull, you might have success. And once you get those stitches onto the needle, you can get rid of that piece of stitch saver and you do not need it. And now what I'm going to be doing is joining these stitches together with the back panel. And again, I'm following my little eeny weeny Novus sweater, but this is exactly the same as the Baby Novus if you are following that pattern. And the first thing that I'm going to do is cable cast on 4 stitches onto this left-hand needle. So cable cast on has you going in between these 2 stitches, wrapping your yarn around and putting that stitch onto the needle. And I'm going to do that 4 more times. So I've got 5 stitches on there. That's 2. This is 3. This is, let's see if I can get my yarn wrapped around there, 4. And that is 5. And I've got those stitches all cast onto the left-hand needle. Now I'm just going to give myself some more working yarn. And you'll see after I get through a row or 2 of this, I'm just going to kind of clean it up to make it easier for you to all see. it will suddenly make sense what is happening. And what I'm doing with this back panel is joining the back left stitches to the back right half stitches. So now I am going to knit 4. And now I am going to slip 1 purlwise with yarn and back, and I'm going to knit the next stitch, and that is a live stitch from the left back. And then finally, I am going to pass this slipped stitch over. And what I've done is join those little panel stitches right there to the left back. And now I'm going to turn my work, and I am going to slip 1 purlwise with yarn in front, and then I'm going to knit 3. 1, 2, 3. And then I am going to slip 1 purlwise with yarn in front, and now I just need to slide these right stitches so they're right there. I've slipped that stitch there. I am going to purl this stitch, and then I'm going to reach to the front of my work and pass that slip stitch over. And now I have joined the right half and the left half to those cast on stitches that I did in the middle. And so now I'm going to continue on just like this, where I slip the first stitch purlwise, I knit 3, I slip the next stitch purlwise, I knit 1, and I pass slip stitch over. And now I turn my work, and I slip 1 purlwise with yarn in front. I bring my yarn to the back. I knit 3. I bring my yarn to the front. And then I purl 1 and pass slip stitch over. Now remember that every Novus pattern is a little bit different, whether you're slipping your stitch knit or purlwise. It depends if you're working garter stitch or you're working stockinette stitch. Sometimes when you're working back panels and side panels in the Novus construction, you're working a knit 2 together or a purl 2 together instead of a knit 1 or purl 1. And that is so that the row gauge of the panel matches the stitch gauge of the right and left halves. I have figured that all out for you in the pattern. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish this back panel, and then I really want to go over how to do the side panels with you. Okay, I just finished my little back panel, and I want to show you how cute it is and then show you what you're going to do with those stitches when you're done with the back panel. So underneath the camera here, I've got that back panel all worked. And now you're just going to take the back panel stitches that become the back of the neckline and put those either onto a piece of stitch saver or a piece of scrap yarn, whichever you want to do, and hold those, and you'll use them again when you go to work the collar. So now that we have finished the back panel, let's go ahead and talk about that side panel together. Okay, this last thing that I have to show you is how to work the little side panels. Yours might be a little bit bigger than this, but the concept is exactly the same. And this is where that stitch saver, I know I keep saying it, but it just comes in so handy, and I'm so excited about it. So if we look at the little side panel once more underneath the camera, you'll see that what I'm doing with the side panel is joining the front and back of the sweater. This is I guess it's the left side panel, so I'm joining the back right here and the front right here, and the side panel is going all the way up. What I love about the side panels in the Novus construction is if you find that you need a little bit more room at your hips or a little bit more room at your bust, you can make this side panel bigger or smaller by a few stitches to help the sweater fit your body. So typically when I get to this point in a Novus sweater, and I actually just finished a new one, I stop and I block it before I go to do the side panels so that I can kind of get it on and get an idea of how wide those side panels really want to be on my body before I go to do this side panel step. So we're going to do this side panel step with the stitch saver on this little mini that we have been working on together. And you'll see the first thing that I'm going to do is get the stitches from the right front. Let me make sure I'm thinking about this right. Yes, from the right front onto my needle, and then we're going to go ahead and reorient those stitches. So what I'm going to do is take my stitches down here at the hem at the stitch saver. I'm going to put my circular needle in there quite tightly so that it doesn't pull out easily, and then I'm just going to kind of pull it along to get all of those stitches onto the needle. And then we're going to go down the sleeve stitches as well and get those stitches onto the needle. And now, ta-da, like how fast was that instead of doing a pickup, right? Now, the next thing that I want to talk to you about is if you go ahead and look at your provisional cast on that you do with Stitch Saver, when you do that cast on, you end up with stitches that are oriented oppositely every other stitch. So like one stitch has a right leg to the front, one stitch has a left leg to the front. Some people fix that orientation as they go ahead and work across the stitches, but you might find that you like to do that now before you go work the side panel. And that's up to you, but I'm going to show you that on this first half so that you understand it. So I'm going to go ahead and slip the first stitch onto the other end of my needle and slip the next stitch on. And then you'll see that this next stitch has the left leg to the front. So as you put it onto your needle, just take it so that you have the right leg of the stitch to the front of the needle. And every other stitch, you'll see I'm reorienting it as I go across. The other thing that I want to show you as we get to this point in here is as we get to the gap between the front stitches and the sleeve stitches, you'll find that there could be a little bit of a hole or a gap right there. So what I like to do is pick up a stitch kind of through the back loop without knitting it. But what that does is kind of tidy up that underarm a little bit. And as you're working the side panel, if you feel like there's a little bit of a gap there, you can even pick up one or two more stitches in there. Now, this is pretty important. When we get to the stitches that are created by those wraps at the end of the sleeve, you will see that the left leg is to the front of the needle. Maintain that, because if you work into those stitches, twisting that stitch as you work them on the side panel, that will tighten up that side panel seam and make it really tidy and neat. So you want to make sure that those still have their twist in them. So once you have one half of those stitches onto your needle, you're going to go ahead and take the end of your circular needle and put the second half of the stitches onto your needle. And then you'll go ahead and do that exact same thing if you want to, where you reorient the stitches and pick up a stitch in that gap. Isn't that so easy to just slide those stitches onto your needle? Now that you have all of those stitches onto a circular needle instead of on the stitch saver, what you can do is go ahead and fold your work at the shoulder. And I'm just going to kind of lay this down flat so that you can see what's going to happen with that side panel. So that side panel is going to be joining the back and front together, and you'll be working it just like you worked the center back panel, where you're binding off a stitch from the back and then binding off a stitch from the front as you work that side panel all the way up the body and then along the sleeve. And when you get to the end of the sleeve, I'm just trying to fold that right there so you can see it, you'll end up binding off your side panel stitches just like this. You can kind of see my side panel on the sweater that I am wearing. And that is the secret to using Stitch Saver for my Novus sweaters. So the last thing I want to talk to you about quickly is working a pullover instead of working a cardigan so that you understand the maneuvers that you would have to do when you come to the other side. And I've got just like a little diagram right here of what a Novus side to side pullover looks like. And you'll see you're casting on right here from the right sleeve, and you're working across your sweater, working the back and front separately for the neckline, reconnecting for the front and back and shoulder. And then when it's time to work the left sleeve, what you'll end up doing is using two separate pieces of stitch saver. I find when I tried to use one long one, it just got really annoying. So I took my front stitches and I put them onto a long piece of stitch saver. And then I did the same with the back stitches when I got to that point in the pattern. And then as you work the sleeve, carry up the stitch saver from the front along the edge of the sleeve right here, and then carry the stitch saver along the sleeve from the back. And that is exactly the same maneuver as you did for the first sleeve, where you're wrapping your working yarn around the stitch saver. And that will make it so that when you go to do the side panel on your pullover, those stitches are ready to just slide right onto your needle instead of having to pick them up. Of course, if you don't have stitch saver, you can be picking up stitches. You don't need stitch saver to do any of these patterns. I just find it so much more helpful. So here is what I want to say. I am always learning. And as I learn and I find things that will make a step in my patterns easier, I promise to share it with you. Again, ask questions, share your projects with me, sign up for my mailing list, subscribe to my channel, all the things so that you know what I'm up to next so I can share as I learn. Thank you so much for watching.